Well, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Uneducated and Untrained Pastor. And I am your host, Pastor Ronnie Qualls, out of Bowlegs, First Baptist Church in Bowlegs, Oklahoma. And hey, I just want to give a thanks to everybody for, again, I want to thank, I don't know if I'll ever stop doing this, but every time I see a like on a video or a new subscriber, we're getting close. We're getting close. We're up to, I think, 43 now. So, just a few, I don't know. I think Joe Rogan was at 17.3 million. So I'm inching there. I'm getting there closer. So we're going to overtake him one of these days. No, honestly, I mean, my prayers are just whoever this would go out to and help. That's all I really care about. Whether it ever gets to that monetary stage where, YouTube pays you money. Lord knows all about that, and He'll take care of every bit of that stuff. But all I want to do is I just want to try to help encourage pastors and lay people, evangelists, even just a person, just a member of churches that could just get some encouragement, some in this, and just maybe just shoot some common sense your way. But anyway, the views, the likes, the subscribers, encouraging texts, phone calls, things like that. And I've got a big announcement today. I say it's big. Um, I've got some good friends, Sam and Gabe Ketcher. Sam's the dad, Gabe's his son. They come over and help me get everything on Spotify and podcasts. So I've had some people tell me, I can't really watch a YouTube video because I'm driving all the time. But if it was on Spotify, I could do it. So, hey, everybody, it's up, it's on there. So praise be to God if it helps anybody. And if the Lord doesn't want this channel out there, I don't have a problem taking it down. So, but today I want to talk to you about something that I think a lot of pastors, I think a lot of Christians go through. So I've titled this, it's got the same title as an old sermon by Vance Havner, an old Baptist mountain preacher that's gone on to be with the Lord years ago. But one time I was really having a struggle, and I think the Lord just brought him to my mind, and I got on sermon audio, and I typed in his name, and I just started scrolling, and my eyes came across a message that he preached years ago. Probably, I think that thing's only about maybe 25 minutes, but it was titled "Have You Lost the Wonder?" And really, what it's talking about is when the joy is just not there. Have you lost the wonder of just the joy of knowing Christ, all of that stuff, And so if you've never heard that sermon, get on there. Get on Sermon Audio and look it up. I think it probably is one of the sermons. It may have the most views of any of them that he's preached. I'm not sure. But I've listened to it a number of times. And on that particular day, it was so fitting. I mean, I just look back at things like that, and like I said, I think God brought him to my mind, and then my eyes fell upon that message, and that's really where I was at. It was one of those times where I was just struggling with, just feel like I probably lost the wonder. And, in that sermon, he tells about an old evangelist that's gone on to be with the Lord named Rodney Gypsy Smith. I guess everybody just knew him as Gypsy Smith. And he was a very much an uneducated and untrained evangelist. In that message, he even tells the part where Gypsy Smith, when he was preaching, he said, he told somebody, he says, when he would come to a big word that he didn't know what it meant, he said, I would stop right before the word and he'd really elaborate, and then he'd skip that word and pick up on the other side. I don't know if that's really the best way to preach, but it was funny nonetheless. And I don't know what the man was like doctrinally. I mean, me and him may have been miles apart on some things, but nonetheless, it appeared the man loved the Lord, because Vance tells a story about him that I want to say that Gypsy was in his late 80s. I don't remember the exact number, but somebody interviewed him, And they said, Gypsy, how is it after all of these years of preaching that your preaching is still so fresh and so vibrant? And his answer was this. He said, I've never lost the wonder. Now, what a testimony of praise to the Lord for that. But I think for a lot of you, you've probably been where I've been. You may be there right now. You may be in a place where you just feel like you've lost the wonder. So I just want to share with you from this pastor to you as a pastor, or you as an evangelist, or you as just a person in the pew in the church every Sunday morning, faithful, but maybe you've lost the wonder too. I want to give you some things that, for some reasons that at times I feel like I've lost the wonder. And a lot of times what happens when we lose the wonder, when that joy just seems to be gone, what happens is we have lost sight of Jesus. You could look at stories like Peter coming and walking on the water and, the waves, and he sees them and he begins to sink. Sometimes it feels a little bit like that. But in my own life, here's some things that have happened to me, and maybe that you can relate. Maybe yours will be different and this probably isn't all of the things. It's just some things that I thought of and jotted down. But sometimes it's the expectations that come from others. And pastors, you know what I'm talking about. There is no shortage of what people expect from you. You come into a church, you're the new pastor, and everybody's excited and all that good stuff. And then instead of the church growing, all of a sudden you got a few families leaving and people are expecting you to do this. I wasn't raised up in church. And and so I don't know these common Baptist practices oftentimes. And to be quite honest with you, I don't really care to know them. I'm not real big on that stuff, but I've had, people come to me and say, well, how come you don't do this or that? I remember one time with my secretary, she's a sweet lady. She works herself off in our church all the time. But I think I'd been here a couple of years, and she came up to me and she said something about graduation. Well, this is like September, and I'm thinking, well, graduation was back in May. Thought she was talking about school, but what she was talking about was Sunday school graduation. Now, I don't know if it's just our church or every Baptist church, but I had no clue that we did anything like that. And so I think sometimes people are looking and expecting you to do certain things, and you don't know that. But what will happen to you is all of a sudden you will start trying to fulfill other people's expectations. You're like, oh, I didn't know, and you'll try to do this, and it's really not anything that is in your mind or your heart or nothing like that. And what happens is it begins to take you away from what God has called you to do. So you'll have things like that. So you have these expectations, and that will lead me right into the next thing. And you get to a point where you are just worn out. You're weary. And a lot of times it's because I don't know what it is. I don't know why this happens, but oftentimes in churches, it's like before the pastor comes, like say a church doesn't have a preacher, they don't have the pastor, and everybody's stepping up. You might have a deacon preaching, and this one's doing that and taking care of different things. Then all of a sudden the pastor comes along, and let's say he's full-time. He's a full-time pastor. Well, all of a sudden, everybody just tends to stop doing anything, and they'll say, well, that's what we pay you to do. Churches, let me tell you something. I don't care if he's paid full-time or not. There is no one man that can or should be trying to do everything. That would be like me buying an arm on my body and saying, well, I paid for you. You've got to do everything now. The legs ain't going to walk. That's just silly. It is a body. And, while, yes, this man may be the pastor, guess what? He's not the most gifted at everything in that church. And that's why it takes the entire body. So what will end up happening is the pastor will just get worn out. He just becomes tired. And when he gets worn out, I mean, the things he should really be focusing on. And I'm just going to put it to you this way. What is the main thing that a preacher comes and does? I think it's just what I said. He's the preacher. He's the guy that's going to bring the word. And if this guy has no time to study, no time to prepare, well, the sermons probably are going to be lacking. He needs to spend time in prayer. Now, I'm not that kind of pastor that believes that I'm going to lock myself away and all I'm going to do is study and pray and somebody else can see the people. I don't believe in that for a second. I believe a pastor. I heard my friend Harold Smith say this the last Sunday. We had him, he come in and preached for us. He said, if a pastor don't smell like the sheep, he ain't much of a shepherd. And, we can understand that. And what that's saying is this, the shepherd, the pastor, he needs to be visiting. He needs to be spending time with the people in his church. And I'll just be honest, there's not probably anybody that thinks they're doing a good enough job on that, myself included, but I'm trying. I'm trying to do better all the time. So the thing of it is, you can get worn out. Somebody said you got to do this and that. And so you start with that. What are the expectations that others place on you, feeling like you have to measure up to that? Then, it's like you're having to do the work of a pastor, the work of a deacon. And oftentimes a church will have, several deacons, but the pastor is the guy doing even the work that they should be doing. And that's a whole nother story. Well, now you throw in the fact that the pastor, he's not superhuman. He's not perfect, nor does he have the perfect family. There's times that me and my wife, we're just like every other couple. There's times we have what you'd call them intense fellowship moments, where you just ain't really getting along too good. Or it could be with the kids. I've got two little minions. We had three children that we had, and then Lord led us into doing foster care for a few years, and we've got two little guys that we've adopted. And people say, oh, that keeps you young. No, friends, it does not. It really makes you tired and feel old. I'm only 22. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm way older than that. But we've got these two little guys that keep us hopping pretty good. And so you have these, you'll have the same family issues that everybody else has. And, then also you throw that in the expectations that, there's expectations thrown on your wife that will end up stressing you out. It's like some reason people think if a pastor has a wife, she automatically should be able to teach. She should be able to listen. She can teach ladies and children and such if she's called or good at it. Just because you're a pastor's wife doesn't mean you have to do that. And the other expectation is pastor, man, well, his kids are heathens. Lord have mercy. Sometimes my kids have led the charge in unruliness, Now you might say, well, you're not even qualified. Well, okay. Tell it to my church. If they want to dismiss me, I guess they can. But I think what it is, I've just got kids and we're just dealing with them just like everybody else. And yes, they're boys. I mean, they get with it, So you have those types of things. Well, sometimes a pastor can start looking around. Here's another thing that happened a couple years ago, and you're going to find this funny. At the age of 56, I'm 58 now. So about the age of 56, I decided to, for whatever reason, get into trying to do some mountain biking. Now, I'm not talking about the crazy, jumping and all that. But nonetheless, I don't know what it was. I like exercise and I like going hiking. Well, man, riding a bike, it feels a lot funner than hiking, actually. And so I started doing that. Well, I found myself after a while that if I had any free time, all I could think about was getting out there to the trails. I had one at the time that was only about, 12, 15 minutes from my house. And I could go out there and get in a good hour and a half ride or something and, just feel like I'd done some kind of good exercise. But the problem is it's easy for a pastor to be just like everybody else if he's not careful. That hobbies, I remember hearing one preacher say a long time ago, he was into bow hunting. And Paul Washer's the guy that said it, and he talked about this English longbow. Now Paul gets pretty intense, and he was all of a sudden he looks at this beautiful English longbow, and he was like, it was just like to him, it was like, behold your God, like he realized that he was getting off track. He was leaving the wonder, and it could happen to anybody. So there's those types of things. So you got hobbies that can take you away, and you think, well, that wouldn't happen to me, brother. I'm going to tell you something, preacher. It can and it will, especially if you're not careful. Now that doesn't mean I can't go mountain bike riding. It doesn't mean that Paul Washer can't go bow hunting with an English longbow. But just like everybody, and even more so, the pastor has to keep these things in check. Now we're going to go back to this one. I've talked about this one before, and I'll talk about it probably now and later on, but a lot of the problem is pastors experience feeling alone, loneliness. My church now, we have a plurality of elders, but many churches have just the single pastor model, and that's probably something I'll talk about down the road. And I personally believe the Bible teaches a plurality of elders. And if you got questions about that, you can put them in the comments and all that good stuff, and I'll try to answer them. And also, while I'm thinking of that, if you guys ever have a question or something that a topic that you'd like me to talk on, if I've been there, if I've experienced it, if I know it a little bit, I'll try to talk about it. But you just gotta, if you know me personally, shoot me a text. If you don't know me, just put it on the comments or whatever, and we'll try to cover it. But just back to loneliness, and this is why, pastor, especially if you're the only pastor, you've got to get some friends. And when I say friends, I mean pastor friends that you can talk to. Now, I don't want to cut out anybody else. I mean, I've got great friends that aren't pastors that I can talk freely with, and so maybe I shouldn't just do that. But the reason I say pastors is because they can really relate to what you're going through and where you're at. So, but not only do you got to have friends, but you've got to initiate. You've got to be proactive in that fellowship with one another. Just a phone call, getting together for lunch. I love going out to Arkansas. Brother Harold Smith, Pastor Harold Smith, he does a pastor's lunch, and there might be 10, 12, 15 guys there, and we have a good time and just eat, fellowship, talk. We cut up, we talk about serious things, and you need that. And there's a reason I go to that, because I need that. I mean, I've got my two elders here that we have a great relationship, but you've got to have this too. So now I want to say this one. Some of the reason that you may have lost the wonder is just sin. And I could go, everybody wants to go to the, pornography or something like that. Well, I mean, yeah, it could be. That will definitely take that from you. That'll steal that. But it doesn't matter what the sin is. It's just, sin will do that, Pastor. It could be a sin of laziness. It could be a sin of anger. It could be, a lot of times pastors get put out with their church and things like that. And anything that happens that takes your eyes off of Jesus, you're going to lose the joy. You're going to forget. And so I want to just real quickly, I want to talk to you about what to do. This verse came to me a couple years ago. Matter of fact, I preached this at the Preachers of Grace conference, and that's when it hit me, because I found myself in a church here at Bowlegs, and in some of these things that I've talked about, maybe expectations, or at least perceived expectations from my point of view, and what I found myself saying all the time when I was praying was like, Lord, I can't figure out what to do. I can't figure out what's going on. And it was like the Lord just kind of told me, he says, I didn't tell you to figure things out. I told you to come and preach the word. I told you to come and love the people and care for them. And I'm real big on communication. I mean, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like, but when there's no communication, I do not do well. I mean, I don't know what it is, but I mean, I can handle. I don't like it, but I can handle if you don't like some things. I mean, at least I know where we're at. I got something to work off of. But anyway, but when Jesus said this, he says, "Come to me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." And I feel like really he's talking to the lost there. And but then that next thing says this. He says, "Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle or meek and lowly in heart." And he says, "And you'll find rest for your souls." And that's where God was really speaking to me, because we have to go back to that childlike faith. And that's the next point I want to talk about. Jesus, let me see. I got a reference in here somewhere. Well, I did. You got to be kidding me. I think it's Matthew 18. Let me look real quick. Yeah, it is. It says at that time, this is 18:1. He says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" And these fellows were always arguing about who was the greatest. And we've got that issue today. We've got people that seem like they're almost jockeying for position. They're popular. Everybody knows them. And not only that, but Pastor, if you're doing this, you got to stop it. "Oh, I think so-and-so is a much superior preacher or greater theologian." Stop all that nonsense. Just stop it. Even the best of men are just men at best. I've heard people say, and I agree, there are no great men of God, but there's just weak men that serve a great God. If you want to talk about who's the greatest and all that, it's none other than Jesus Christ. But they were always arguing about this. And anyway, so, right here it says, Jesus, when they asked the question, here's the way he answers. He called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Unless you just pass any kind of memory, we can all remember what it was like being a child with our parents. Man, it was complete trust. It just felt like complete love. Now, I say this with an asterisk. I know some people grew up in homes that were troubled homes. Okay, I get that. But in the ideal situation, man, you knew your parents loved you. You didn't worry about things. You knew you were going to get fed. You knew you were going to have a bed. I mean, you didn't worry about none of the things that we all get to worry about as adults, right? Oh, man, when we become Christians, man, to go back to those times when it was all new and it was all fresh. And let me put it this way, the joy of the wonder of knowing Jesus. And then what happened? We start growing. We start believing the hype that we're reading about ourselves. "Oh, brother Ronnie, man, God uses him. I love to hear him speak." And you fill up with that pride, but you do it in the most humble way. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Lord, help us. Help us. I want to give you something. I was preaching through Corinthians a while back, and anytime you want to thank somebody to their face for a sermon they preached or something they said, do it in the biblical way. Paul said this. He said, "I thank God for you and your giftings and all these things." Somebody preaches a good sermon, don't thank them. Say, "I just want to give God thanks for the sermon that he used you to preach." Do it in the right and biblical way. That's a good place to start. Man, I'm going to tell you something. Pastors probably all struggle a little bit with wanting to know that their preaching is being received and it affects people in a good way. But when you find out, it doesn't take too much to be just that pride to enter in. So you got to be careful there. But what I'm getting at is we want to go back to that childlike faith. I'll give you an example. I had a friend one time. He didn't have any work, and somebody told him, he said, "Go down to this place down in Texas and drive out of town." And it was out in the middle of nowhere. He said, "When you get out there, somebody will come to this fence." It was like kind of enclosed, this factory or whatever it was. And they said, somebody will come out and they'll say, hey, are any of you guys machinists? And he says, just tell him you are. And now he wasn't a machinist at all. But what he didn't tell my friend, his friend, what he didn't tell him was, he said, there's going to be about several hundred guys out there wanting a job. Well, sure enough, he goes out and somebody comes out and he has a paper and he says, hey, is anybody here a machinist? My friend goes, oh yeah, right here. They open the gate, let him in, he gets in, and guess what? He was not a machinist, but you know what? He was so excited and thrilled that he had a job. I mean, not only a job, but this was the top of the food chain in this facility, this factory. And he realized, like, hey, they're going to catch on. I'm not a machinist. So he thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sweep. I'm going to do everything that I can, anything extra, and I'm going to show them I'm a good worker. That maybe when they find out, they won't fire me. They'll just demote me, but I'll still have a job. Well, guess what? He would try to do these things, and the machinist was like, hey, get over here, man. We're on break. Don't be sweeping up during break. Let them other people do that. Well, he had his plan, but what he ended up doing was there was an older gentleman there, and he said, look, I'm not really a machinist, but if you'll teach me this, he says, I'll be your grunt man. I'll do anything that you need done. Guys, deal. Guess what? He was taught how to be a machinist, but you know what happened in the process? He forgot the excitement of what it was just to get a job. He was up here now, and this down here was beneath him. And pastor friend, if you ain't careful, that will happen to you. Always take the low road. Always take the place of humility, okay? You want to have that childlike faith. You don't want to forget. And sometimes what you got to do is you got to go back and just remember God's promises to you. You got to go back, and what you do is, I mean, sometimes you just fried. You just need you got to remember the promises God made you. If you remember in 1 John 3:1, he says, "Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the children of God." Whew. The promise of God's love. Jesus, when he sent him out in the Great Commission, what did he say? He says, and I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. What did he tell him in Hebrews chapter 13:5? He says, I will never leave you, nor will I forsake you. These are promises that God has given us. So even when that joy is gone, the wonder doesn't seem to be there, God hasn't forgot you. And what did he tell you in Romans 8? He said, there's nothing that can separate you from my love. There's nothing. You got to remember those promises. And friend, what you got to do, you've got to go back, that childlike faith. You've got to learn again what it is to spend time with God. Now listen to me. When I'm talking about spending time with him, I'm not talking about trying to get an edge, trying to get ahead. What I'm talking about is spending time with God simply because he's God. I'm talking about seeking him in prayer because he's your Father. That you'd spend time with him in prayer. You'd spend time with him in the Word, not so you can preach a sermon, but just because it's his Word and he's speaking to you. You see, preacher, when you get back to that, you'll be able to say, I found the wonder. The joy of the Lord is my strength. But when all of these other things, and maybe your list is a little different than mine, but when all these other things are taking your focus away and all of that, and you just lost the wonder, and even though you're trying to pastor, you're doing all these things, you're doing everything but pastoring. You're doing everything to prepare but preparing. You've got to learn to get alone with God. You've got to learn, and that happens through prayer. It happens through the reading of his Word. And then you've got to learn to say this, God, fill me with your Spirit. Lead me by your Spirit. I don't care if it makes everybody upset. You show me what I need to do. Friends, that's the message I got for you today. That's the encouragement I want to leave you with, is that, go back and listen to that old sermon by Vance Havner. Man, what a great preacher he was. But listen, if you've lost the wonder, learn to get alone with God. Until next time, this is Pastor Ronnie. And I'm glad you gave me just a bit of your time. God bless each one of you. We'll see you next week. Amen.